The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
Beloved, greetings to you and welcome to Faith Without Borders. I'm your host, Pastor Calvin Sauls. It is a joy for me to have all of you join us today as we continue with our series during this, what I call Women's Herstory Month, just to invite and create platform for our sisters to come and share with us from their respective disciplines or areas of work, while at the same time remembering those who've gone before us, on whose bold and broad shoulders we stand on. As you know, here at Faith Without Borders, we work hard in seeking to be a progressive platform, a prophetic platform that engages in thought-provoking and solutions-driven dialogue on critical issues that we face locally here in Los Angeles, nationally in the United States, and indeed globally. And we know that there is a whole lot going on right here in Los Angeles as well as in the United States, and we're going to get to all of that with our esteemed guests today who will be bringing perspective for us as we continue to make our way through this month and through these turbulent and tumultuous time. So in commemoration of International Women's Day, which was March the 8th, as well as Women's Herstory Month, we will examine the topic, what do you choose to challenge? We all know that a challenged world is an alert world, and from challenge comes change. So how do we celebrate the achievement of women and elevate our commitment to continue the fight for gender equality and racial equity? That's what we want to get to, so celebration as well as evaluation and elevation, as we march towards this preferred destiny, of gender equality and racial equity. So glad today to be joined by some dynamic, leaders, and we'll introduce them in a few minutes. But we want to start with a video that comes to us from the website of International Women's Day. Just a powerful spoken word, I think, that frames for us this theme that they have for this year, Choose to Challenge. And so let's receive that. And then on the other side, we'll continue, our conversation with our guest and go deep. So let's be inspired.
Gender is a pre-written book, and the plot is boring. Daughter, girlfriend, mother, wife, rip out the pages, staple them to your back, and start soaring. Pretty, quiet, weak. They will try to describe you with such things, but you will use their stereotypes and turn them into your wings. When you choose to challenge, gender is a pre-written book, but not all the girls' stories end the same way. 33,000 girls are forced to become child brides every day. 132 million girls are not in school. And their futures are balloons that they watch drift away. But you are the full stop to the story. You are the new sentence that takes it on a different road. When you speak up, you open your palms and you share the load when you choose to challenge. Gender is a pre-written book, but not all of the characters are included, like the First Nations women who stand as still as statues, always walked past but never acknowledged or seen, or migrant women whose culture stands like a skyscraper, and they're forced to burn down the parts of themselves society doesn't deem convenient, or refugee women who are treated with brutality when we should have been lenient. And you are there as the story unfolds and you are faced with a choice. So choose to challenge. Gender is a pre-written book, and this is your chance to add your own chapter, to call out racism and sexism, and use courage to rub it out, to stand where the rest of the world has chosen to sit, to call it out at home, at work, at school, bit by bit, to scream where the world has chosen to whisper, not just for your daughter, your mother, or your sister. Let us choose to challenge. Gender is a pre-written book. And if you're listening to this, then your actions are the pen. Your life is the paper. You are not the oppression of the past. I believe that you are so much greater, stronger, kinder. Choose to create history, not to be created by it. Choose to challenge.
Wow. Every time I hear that, I just get chills. Just so powerful. And we all know about the power of spoken word. That spoken word provides a framework for us for our conversation today with, three friends, three sisters who are out on the front lines that I respect and appreciate just for the work that they are doing. And they are certainly allies, in this work and that we seek to engage in around gender equality as well as racial, justice. So I'd like to welcome, today, Dr. Kimani Norington-Sands. She's a psychologist and an author, and she does incredible work on so many levels, as well as through her organization and her business, which is Lifting as We Climb, and just appreciate her and the work that she's doing. So glad that you're able to join us. Doc, good afternoon, good day, hello, blessings. So welcome, Dr. Kimani. Are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Thank you. Hello.
Wonderful.
Good to see you all.
Yeah, so good to have you. Also having with us the Reverend Dr. Najuma Smith-Pollard, who is the founding pastor of the Word of Encouragement Community Church here in Los Angeles, as well as the program director at Cecil Murray Center for Civic Engagement at the University of Southern California. Reverend Doctor, are you there?
I am, and I'm here. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me, Pastor Sauls.
Yes, I know you were up early this morning hitting the airwaves, so congratulations on that. You'll tell us a little bit about it. Always
Sure.
I want to celebrate and elevate what we all are doing. And then I want to welcome a dear sister, Adjoa Jones, who is with us as well. And we welcome her. She is, one who has done a lot of work, around African American infant and maternity mortality, health and wellness. And in fact, we want to congratulate her because she was just given an award by our assembly woman, certainly Kamala Dove, at an event called Sister Circle. She was honored for the incredible work that she's doing around, this critical, aspect, of, African American infant and maternal mortality, and she works with the community, action teams around that. Adjoa, welcome. Good to have you, my sister.
Oh, thank you so much, Pastor Sauls. It is great to be here. Thank you for inviting me to be with you and my esteemed sisters. I am very proud to be here. And yes, our senator-elect, well, for my district, Sidney Kamala, it was amazing. So thank you, and thank you for inviting me.
So yeah, you're right. Thank you. She is senator-elect. She's moving into that seat pretty soon. But she was our assemblywoman, and I say our because we, that's who she's collaborating with. Let's dig in. I'm going to be sitting at your feet today, just listening and learning, and really just appreciate who you are and the work that you're doing. I want to start with, Dr. Kimani, just the work that you're doing. Given where we are and what we are going through, in terms of just our emotional and our mental well-being, in this particular moment of reckoning, what do you choose to change? We'll start there, and then we'll take it from there. Dr. Kimani?
That's an awesome question because it's multiple things. So I choose to challenge oppression on any front, and I'm fighting for mental liberation. And as I'm fighting for mental liberation, I'm also clear that as Black people and as Black women, that we are put in situations in which we bear the brunt of everything, right? So when there's a pandemic, when there's a crisis, when there's a trauma, Black people, bear the brunt of it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm here to raise awareness of that and also to talk about ways that we can heal collectively and individually. And part of that is recognizing those things that are impacting our wellness, mm-hmm. and also being intentional about taking a moment to pause and rest. So radical rest. How do we practice radical rest? Because if we keep going at the pace that we're going to keep getting really sick and be put at situations in which we are disproportionately impacted by issues because we are not in the best physical position as well. So physically and mentally, we have to take a moment to pause and rest and look at those issues impacting our wellness and address those issues. And if that might be getting therapy, it might mean getting therapy. But what do we need to do to help support ourselves? Because our growth and our well-being is needed, in terms of the continuation of our communities, in terms of healing our communities as well.
Yeah, I want to hang with you for a minute because you mentioned two very important pieces. One, the mental liberation, which we know is just so critical, given the history of oppression, discrimination, marginalization, and, discrimination, in the United States. And how, that continues to have, an ongoing effect and impact, on us. And this whole piece around, you put together two words that I've never heard put together, which is radical rest, around it, which really is in so many ways something that women sometimes never have the almost the luxury of experiencing, because, one, of course, of responsibilities, but just the role, that this society, has almost, created or designated, for women. So how do we bridge that to the need for mental liberation and the work mm-hmm. that goes into that, while at the same time, the very much important work, of not just any rest, but as you
Mm-hmm.
put it, radical rest, and maybe give us some, examples on how we can, engage both,
Okay.
in such a way that it protects us, it
Mm-hmm.
frees us, but it
Mm-hmm.
also keeps us well emotionally and mentally.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for us to start with Black people across the world that we have been the targets of physical and psychological warfare. And when we recognize that, then we are in a different position to say, hey, how has that then impacted my mental health and those of us around us? Because what happens sometimes is that sometimes we might internalize some of those oppressive messages in terms of how we see ourselves and how we see each other, and it may play out in terms of our behavior. So in terms of issues of self-esteem, right? Issues of how we interact with one another, how we judge one another, issues of competition. So how does that play out in terms of that is something that was done intentionally to divide and conquer, and it's still playing out to this day. So issues of skin color, right? Issues of class, all those issues have been used to divide and conquer. And so first, is awareness, to be aware of, hey, this is a problem. Hey, I've internalized it on some level. How am I going to address it? So that might be talking to other people. That might be therapy, whatever that might be. But the first step is awareness. And I just think about a young woman I heard on a video, a Black woman, and she said, you can't heal what you don't reveal, right? So you have to be aware first that it's an issue and then address it. The other issue in terms of, radical rest, I can't take credit for that. That is a term that I've been hearing in terms of, different people have been talking about soul murder or spirit murder, right? So the impact that has on us, and it's buying into this way of thinking in terms of this white supremacist way of thinking that we always have to be working to prove our worth, right? That is a dysfunctional way of thinking, and that has killed us. So just thinking in terms of when we have just continued to work, even though we're tired because we're trying to prove to other people that we're not lazy, we're not all these other things, but it's killing us. And so when we think about radical rest, I heard a speaker talk about when we think about radical rest, it's radical in the sense that as Black people, we've never given permission to rest, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were brought here to work. And so when you think about radical rest, it's healing not only for you to take a moment and rest and recharge, and you can also, when you take that moment to recharge, you can connect to your soul and you can hear the voice of God when you're quiet, right? When you're not always working. But when you think about healing not only yourself, you're also healing our ancestors because they weren't given the opportunity to rest. And we're also modeling for our children. What does that mean to take a moment and rest? You don't always have to be on the grind. Don't buy into that. That is a route to our destruction. And recognizing what types of issues are not contributing to our wellness. The other thing I wanted to say is when I talk about radical rest, there's a woman who has an Instagram page, and she has a Twitter page also. It's called the Nap Ministry. And she talks about how important it is to rest. And she talks about that rest is a form of soul care. And we as a people are soulful people, but we've had a disconnection in many ways with our soul, which then impacts our mental health. And it then contributes in terms of us being more open and harmed by psychological warfare. Mm-hmm. So in terms of taking that intentional pause, taking that reflection, getting the help if we need it, and getting help by people who understand our experience also is very important.
Lord have mercy. See, you, Doc, you're killing me, Doc. but I'm here to be about life, so I ain't gonna die. But thank you for that. Certainly, rest is medicinal, and as Dr. Kimani, talks about the importance of emotional and mental wellness. She connects this whole piece, just beautifully around. Once we don't care of that, we actually could be engaging in soul murder. Lord, again, you're giving me a lot of stuff here. Soul murder. This is an excellent transition, to Reverend Dr. Juju, in terms of just, within, our faith tradition is this whole piece of Sabbath, right?
Right.
But Sabbath many, many times is challenged by the Protestant work ethic. And if you take that work ethic and you apply it to us, as Dr. Kimani said, we've been brought here to work. So, Sabbath and black folk, that could be an oxymoron, right? So how do we connect, just the emotional and the mental wellness with the very important aspect of spiritual wellness, in terms of that? Take it away, Doc.
Right. So I do believe that all things happen for a reason. And Dr. Kimani lifted up radical rest. And just last night, I was on a Zoom conversation with a group of women about radical self-love. Mm-hmm. And to include rest was part of that conversation. And one of the questions that came up, and so this is leading into answering your question, is how do I love myself and love God? As if I have to make a choice between loving myself and loving God. And what I said to them is the radical self-love is not me choosing myself over God, but it's actually a reflection of my realization and awakening of just how much God loves me. And because I recognize, or I come into the awakening, or I have, the epiphany moment, whatever is needed, whatever happens, and I recognize just how much God loves me, I can lean into radical self-love because I recognize just how much God loves me, to include taking care of me and prioritizing me. And so to your question about that juxtaposition between Sabbath and the Protestant way of working, part of why that has existed and that narrative or that energy has been propagated through the Black church is because we didn't see ourselves through the eyes of God. We saw ourselves through the eyes of white people and white men. And I think what's happening this is not absolute for everyone across the board, but as we came out of enslavement and came through Jim Crow, we saw much of our worth through the eyes of white people. And so if I see my self-worth in the eyes of white people, then yes, I'm going to always use your model as the standard for how I should show up. And if I use your model as a standard, then I'm going to work my tail off because I want to prove to you how worthy and valuable I am. But when I start seeing myself through the eyes of God, I don't have to prove myself no more, which means I ain't got to work till I die. I ain't got to preach until I fall on the pulpit and pass out from a heart attack. I don't have to, lose my family because I'm serving everybody in the church, but I'm not serving my family. I'm praying for everybody else, but I'm not praying for my own kinfolk. And so I think part of what's emerging maybe in the last 15, 20 years or more, possibly, is as people of faith, we no longer, or we're growing into no longer seeing our worth and our value and ourselves through the eyes of white folks, but truly through the eyes of God. And so we're able to now not kill ourselves in the pulpit, which so many of our fathers, grandfathers, great-grandma, and when I say pulpit, I don't mean just the pulpit. I mean, that pulpit could be, could represent a number of different things, but because I'm a pastor and because we talk about church, but we know pastors who have literally died in the pulpit, preached themselves to death, weren't eating, taking rest, weren't taking care of themselves because so much of our value and self-worth, we use the white man's standard. But when I see myself through God's eyes, it's a different standard. And God calls me to rest. Protestant leaders may not, but God gives me not only permission, but commands me to rest. And then says, and if you don't know how to rest on your own, I'll teach you. Come unto me all who are heavy, who are weary and heavy laden, and I will teach you how to rest. So I think we're coming into that more and more. And I think more of these kinds of conversations are happening and we are becoming a healthier people. It's going to take some time because we got 400 or 500 years of nonsense that we got to flush out and flushing out never goes easy, but we're getting there, and we're doing better. We're doing better. Got a ways to go, but we're doing better.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, your whole piece around self-love remind me, you know, of the words from, you know, one of my heroes, Audre Lorde. You know, she simply says, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare.
Absolutely.
You know, so I think that is just so powerful in terms of the fact that I engage in radical rest, I engage in self-love. It's just part of my struggle for liberation.
Right.
You know,
and the challenge is for so many, like the woman asked me the question, like, to choose me, and you're because I know the conversation theme is about what do you choose, and to the woman's question is like, in her mind, somebody keeps calling. Sorry, somebody is all you always call when you're in the middle of a Zoom conversation, right? She thought that she had to choose between herself and God, as if choosing her meant she wasn't choosing God.
Right.
And to the thought about Audre Lorde and others, I don't have to choose God or me. Choosing me is choosing God, because God chooses me first.
Right.
Yeah.
So quickly, what would you choose to challenge? You know, Juju.
You know what? I'm upset today. And you probably saw. I know you saw my post. I'm upset at Governor Kemp. I'm mad. I'm upset about that. So, I mean, I think on a daily basis, I choose to challenge white supremacy, in all the ways it shows up in my life as a Black woman, a faith leader. I choose to challenge the inequities that I live in South Central LA. So I don't challenge the things that I see in my neighborhood from a place of distant proximity, but it's up close and personal for me. And then I choose to challenge the whole notion that I can't be something because I'm a Black woman. Right? Like I challenge that on a daily basis. Right. And I think I just do that the way I show up sometimes. And I've probably been like that for a very long time, but I choose to challenge what they say I can't be and can't do. And what I've learned is that empowers others to challenge the same thing. And again, on a local level here in my community, I challenge the inequities and even some of the, institutional racism that we are all contending with. And I choose to challenge today. I choose to challenge the racist Governor Kemp.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to get into that, in a few, because we're going to have a smorgasbord here in a few minutes. And I know that all of us have something to say about a lot that's going on. I want to bring in Adjoa, given, your work that you're doing around mothers, as well as, maternal health and wellness, or infant, and that has to do, of course, with infant mortality. I want to connect that, Adjoa, with what both, Pastor Juju and Dr. Kimani, said just around the context that we are in, a context, of course, that's framed all the time by the ideology and the theology of white supremacy, and the role many, many times that Black women, Black mothers, how, Black women, have been brought into all of that, and the role that they had to play, in terms of, sustaining, that particular economy that was created on our backs through us around it. Yet, there's still a lot of challenges just around, the health and wellness of mothers, of infants, and just what goes on around that. Can you just share some perspective, around that? Because that then boils down to, of course, physical, wellness, but it's connected to the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual.
So yes, thank you, Pastor Sauls. I was like soaking it up, right? And I'm like, how do I really bring all this together, what my sister said about the rest and about the self-love, especially as it relates to, me as a child of God, a woman of faith, right? And my community and what my community has done. So like you said, Pastor Sauls, first of all, we were the chattel. We were brought here to serve. And so that's where it all begins. That's where the trauma began, from being taken from Africa, put on those ships, and then brought here. And as chattel, I found it to be very interesting now that as I go into this work, how we were the wet nurses, we were the midwives, we were the cooks, we were the cleaners, we were in the field, we were doing all the labor, yet and still, and you allow, now see, if I don't like someone, there's no way that my child would be able to nurse at their breast. But yet and still, it was our mothers who did that, our foremothers, right? It was also our foremothers who were able to birth their children into this land and care for them, right? It was also the fact that we were the ones that were cooking and feeding you, right? So you had to put your trust in you may have acted as though it was because of the whip and the chain, but it was actually still the fact that we could have decided to do anything in that moment. But we decided to show you our strength, right? God blessed us with this strength and character, but it also created a generational wound of the fact that we don't rest, right? And so as I was thinking about that, we don't rest because we had not been given the opportunity to. Even when we had, there was a time when our men were really fully in the house and they were always taken from the husband to the children and so forth. And so we had to keep going and do this job, right? And so as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about, what do I choose to challenge? I choose to challenge the system that has long devalued Black women, right? And won't hear them. I choose to challenge the fact that you could sit in silence in the face of unnecessary Black infant and maternal deaths. And so that's why you have programs like recently CDC created the Hear Her campaign, because they weren't hearing Black women, but they weren't hearing other women as well. But more importantly, the issue behind that is that Black women, when I started this community action team and some of this work in 2018, was looking at some of the data that was saying how Black moms were dying at these high rates. And one of the quotes that I always use is that not only do we die at 3 to 4 times the rate of white mothers, and that's just in California, but in Texas and New York is about 11 to 12 times higher than white women. But then it's also the fact that a Black woman is 22% more likely to die from heart disease, 71% more likely to die from cervical cancer, but 243% more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications in the United States of America. And that was the problem and impetus, because I had done this work in Black infant health since the 90s, but it was the impetus for adding this piece around saving Black moms. So I'm still, in the challenge, I'm choosing to challenge the fact that we are not celebrated for having birth. So when you talk about rest, why can't we rest in this pregnancy and be celebrated? Why won't folks allow us to just enjoy the journey, right? We see others enjoying the journey, being celebrated. And so that's the goal in the work that we're doing in LA County through our AIM initiative and through a lot of our partners' work, is to celebrate Black women and Black birth and to save and protect Black moms and babies. And so articles, even such as CNN had an article that said that Black babies fare worse in the care of white doctors than they do in the care of Black doctors. How is that so? It's because here's a system that has long devalued us and our children. And so that's what I'm working to challenge, that system, and also challenge the fact, when you talk about rest and you talk about my soul care, Reverend Juju and Dr. Kimani, here's what the issue is. How do I rest when I have to have multiple streams of income? Because I can't live, you won't allow me to lead and be that I know to be, because you either won't promote, you'll give this or that, and then I have to still figure out these ways, because I want my children to be blessed. I want them to go to college. I want them to have the finer things of life. And so that is what the challenge is. We want to rest. We want to have some enjoyment, but we have to figure out how to do this. And so now is the time, is if we challenge the system and say, hey, listen, we know how to lead. We've done very well with leading. Give us that opportunity, because this is going to take a long time to fix a problem that you created. And like you said, 400, 500 years, I need 20 plus years of funding and support. I need policy that changes the system and that ensures that Black women and babies thrive and survive. And that I'm still challenging also, stop telling the lies that our fathers are not here and engaged, because they are, and give them that opportunity to also be fathers to their children and be present. And so that's what I would, start, my portion of the conversation with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. I mean, you mentioned value. We all know that there's a huge value gap, in this mm-hmm. country because of that, ideology, theology of white supremacy around, the lives of whites and, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That's just a fact. And because of that, we are sitting within a pandemic where there's availability, but certainly not accessibility, in terms of that. So that's just, ongoing, for us. Mm-hmm. I mean, the statistics you mentioned around, Black mothers succumbing, I mean, that statistic, that's as far as I'm concerned, it that ought to sound the alarm, because mm-hmm. that becomes a matter of, the survival, the continuation, mm-hmm. if you will, of who we are as a people, right? Given the pivotal central role that women play, right? In ensuring, how we, not just survive but thrive, in this country and, around the world, and with all of that going on, Dr. Kimani, how in the work that you're doing, how does all of this that we've just framed, how does that just affect, the efficacy, if you will, the individual or the personal efficacy, of how can we continue, to engage in the celebration, the protection, of women around, advancing, our life's work of gender equality and racial equity.
Wow. First, I want to say thank you, both ladies, for sharing so much rich information. I was like, wow, yes. That's a deep question, because, as we stated, and as we in survival mode, right? So physically and psychologically, right? So, just in terms of just survival, in terms of our, daily existence, right? But also in terms of our psychological well-being, even in the workplace, we have to deal with so much microaggressions and so many other things. And so how do we survive is by pulling on our sources of cultural healing, right? So our connection to our soul and to God. So that helps to sustain us. What are some really having a true understanding of our history, because that grounds us in our greatness. So knowing what our ancestors went through, and the fact that they survived and they, make so many sacrifices for us to be here, that reminds us of our greatness, right? So sometimes in history, we've learned about, your descendants of slaves and, that whitewash history, but we have to revisit that and say, no, that is not our true history. We came from Africa. We were doing these things in Africa. Africa, we have to know about Africa and our connection to Africa. And we have to change the language in terms of, we were not slaves. We were enslaved, right? Mm-hmm. So we were stolen and enslaved, and talk about our true history for our kids and for our adults. Because a lot of times when you're disconnected from your history, then it's hard for you to have that sense of understanding of your greatness and your potential, connection to history, our true history, and having that connection to our soul.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because we're so busy and doing so many things, there's that disconnect. So how do we pause, rest, have that connect? And also, how do we recognize that a lot of the things that are going on right now are ways to disconnect us from our cultural forms of healing? If we think about the music that we're hearing, what we're seeing in terms of the media, all these different things are not supporting our, so that's the one thing. Now, something else I wanted to say that's not directly related, but it is related based on everything we've been talking about, is I was just thinking about, just reflecting when you powerful women were talking in terms of, we're talking about Black women dying, during childbirth or during pregnancy. We're talking, well, we didn't talk about this, but I'm going to talk about it. Black youth suicide. Just now the rates are just skyrocketing, at a rate that we've never seen before. And so when we think about all those different elements, to me, that looks to me like genocide, right? So you're destroying a whole community of people through their children. And I'm thinking about Dr. Joy DeGruy, and her work, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And in the intro of her book, she talks about, she goes to an elder, and the elder says, "How are the children?" And she says, "Not well. But that is my job to make sure that the children are well." Our children are not well. We're not well. And so we have to recognize as a people, we are not well, but not in a deficit way. We have to say we're not well and we are healing, and we are doing so individually and collectively. So that's what I would suggest in terms of, we have to move forward in terms of this healing mentality and support one another as we're healing, right? So my company's called Lifting as We Climb. I absolutely believe we have to continue, as we're healing, we have to pull up other people at the same time to support them.
Yeah, I love the name of your company, by the way, and you know this because of just the historical significance of that phrase, lifting, as we climb. You mentioned sources, of cultural healing. We want to, before we finish up, just share some, examples of those sources. But, you mentioned this whole piece, and I've heard it a lot of the difference between slavery and enslavement. And then I'm going to, invite, Reverend Juju to come in because of what's happening, in Georgia. I think Georgia and all the other, states that are working on 200 plus, legislations around, voter suppression, is really why it is important to talk about enslavement, because then we are describing a system, right? Yeah. We're describing an institution that has been that has never been, let go, right? Even though we had the Emancipation Proclamation, right? But the system of enslavement, continue to evolve, to evolve in this country, because of what's going on. And Georgia, is, a good, bad example of that, whatever you want to call it. But it's really saying to us, look, we're going to go ahead and engage, one, in Jim Crow 2.0, two, when an elected official tried to come in, to try and basically be present at the signing of these discriminatory laws, that was passed in the Georgia legislature, she was arrested and dragged out, which is something that didn't happen, for instance, on January the 6th. We saw, this disparity in, the response of law and enforcement. And then we're sitting, with a U.S. Senate, who just refused, to deal with, what was brought to them from the House as it relates to, the protection of, voting rights. in terms of that, and hanging on, to this, relic, from, white supremacy, and that Southern strategy, of trying to keep white minority, power in play, so that's kind of what's happening, right? In terms of just always trying to reform enslavement around that. Reverend Juju, I know you went Drake, on Governor Kemp when you say I'm upset. So let's talk about this, especially because primarily women, has been taking the lead in fighting voter suppression, in Georgia in so many ways. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I just think, it's just disgusting. And there's no other way to put this. And there's no need for us to sugarcoat it, because it is what it is. It's disgusting. And for me, I just could not say anything. And part of what this moment, and when I say moment, I'm talking about in this last year or so, I think fuels in a lot of us is, this I'm not going to sit silent any longer. You have Adjoa who speaks very clear about maternal health, and Dr. Kimani who speaks very clear and openly about our mental and physical wellness. And for me, as one who's a faith leader and addresses issues around civic engagement, and so I feel, as as we're talking about women's history, and then of course you have in Georgia women who are already activated. They were activated as early as yesterday afternoon in Georgia, for Representative. I'm going to say her. The representative that was arrested, I've lost her name, escapes me in this moment, who activated right away when we saw that horrible injustice of her being arrested under some false terms that she kicked the trooper, when in fact we saw hundreds of white men storm the Capitol, which we know for a fact they did because we saw it, and none of them were hauled away at all. So it's just disgusting, and I'm committed to continue to lift my voice in a very clear and direct way in these ways. And to your point about back, you mentioned something about going back to, but I'm not sure if we got there. I was asked to submit a piece for the Berkeley forums, and they give you like a what do you call that? Kind of like a synopsis of where they're going. And in that synopsis, it was like, how do we build back together? And I intentionally crossed the word back. And in quotes or in parentheses, I said, I intentionally struck out the word back because we've actually never been an equitable society. So we can't, and the word back suggests we've been there. We ain't been there yet. We're still trying to build it. And so I think this is just a season for women of all races, but especially of vulnerable communities, disenfranchised communities, this is the season for us to just continue to be very clear in lifting our voices. And what we do know, when we fight, we win.
Absolutely. And you win what you organize for. That's very, very
absolutely
important.
Yes.
So that's just critical to be, whatever the call is going to be, if it's going to be, a divestment from Georgia or boycotting of companies, then we got to organize that, be strategic and systemic, as Pastor Smart, put it on Facebook, for us. Adjoa, your response, just in terms of the moment of reckoning that we are in. We are standing on the bold and broad shoulders of so many mothers, who've gone before us, right? Who was able to, balance, all of this, whether it was bold political action, birth, or beautiful artistic, renditions, of who we are as a people. Your thoughts in terms of this, this moment that we are in. How can we, continue to make sure that, what you are talking about, around, mothers. There will be mothers that will be in that voting line in Georgia that now will not be able to get even any water or snacks or refreshments, because now that's against the law. There are going to be mothers who are working, and getting off after 5, but now cannot go and vote because this new law says the voting polls got to close at 5. Your thoughts, on this moment that we're in?
So my thoughts are this: when God gave me this vision about addressing community and government partnership to address infant mortality, but that was about 10 years ago when I was in grad school, and then I stopped for a while. And then I got this position with public health, health services, and I was to develop a community action team, right? And so my focus in the team was maternal health. And so in that focus, I said, hey, we need to bridge the gap, because public health, Dr. Ferrer, the nation was saying that racism was one of the leading causes, right, of infant mortality. At the same time, it was saying the same for maternal mortality. And so from women not being heard. So what the community action team was developed for was to bring community and government together to address this issue, to identify gaps in services and resources, to strategize, to look at sustainability, to take action around this. And, we started in 2018, and we have seen such amazing work and partnership throughout the community. So for me, that is what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to strategize. And because of such, we're fastly approaching Black Maternal Health Week, which Black Mamas Matter Alliance started this Black Maternal Health Week in 2018. And Jan, as a partner from Black Women for Wellness, brought it to LA County. And I, through our collaboration team, partnered for SPA 6 with her to have this week of events here in LA County in April of 2018. So because of such, we've been doing something every year, right? So thankful to our second supervisorial district supervisor, Holly J. Mitchell, who did an excellent job for us at the Senate level and had SB 464, which was Pregnancy and Dignity in Childbirth Act. So community action team members also got involved in that and helped to push forth that bill and policy, right? And now we're working on implementation. But just last week, just the other day, she put forth the motion, which was unanimously approved by the entire Board of Supervisors, for April 11th and through 17th to be Black Maternal Health Week here in LA County permanently, and also for April 16th to be the Day of the Black Infant. And so those are things that we have to do. That's what we're doing, right? So there's other bills and policies coming up for like doula. We put forth, along with myself and a couple other colleagues, Diamond Lee, Raina Granberry, Stella Klingman, we put forth a board motion for doula expansion here in LA County and what that would look like. And the board approved that in January of 2020. So those are the things we're taking action for. There's more being moved and happening now. So how would we do that? We would do the same in Georgia to ensure that even though they're suppressing the vote, that we can work around it. We've always been a people to be able to work around it. Sometimes we have to move, our strategies have to move in silence. We have to ask the Lord, what is the new strategy? You know, we're all on here, I can tell, and by the conversation, we're all people of faith. Father God, what is our new strategy? Help us to conquer the enemy. Because, even though our white brothers and sisters are, who they are, they're human too. And they have to recognize and realize, just as we do, who is the sovereign God. And I believe the sovereign God says, touch not mine anointed and do my people, my prophet no harm. And that includes, some of his children and his people. So, folks should be very cautious of how they move in the vein that they do when they're constantly going the negative route. There's no reason to go the negative route. There's no reason to constantly over-criminalize Black men and women, and especially the most vulnerable. Here you are, men, and you're over-criminalizing, dragging women into the streets for what? Knocking on a door?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that is what we have to do, Pastor Sauls. I'm grateful, even to be a part of the Women of SCLC, and we're taking this conversation of infant and maternal mortality here in this state, locally in our city, and nationwide, and other health issues. And so that's what we're doing. We're moving the needle. We're having these conversations out loud and together as a collective, and we're looking for true allies. Who are the real allies? Those that understand it's a partnership together. We all win together. We don't win when we're crabs in the bucket, pulling each other down, fighting for the shine over the other person. It's really not necessary. We're just like, let's all do our part. When you're on a team, I can't carry all the positions, right? Mm-hmm. If I carry all the positions, something is going to fail. Yeah. And so that's what we have to do to be able to get to that place of rest for our full body and for our soul. And so what are we doing here? We're making our own herstories, like you said, our stories, our herstory.
Absolutely. And yes, go ahead.
Add something there, just really quickly.
Yes.
So, when you said making, herstory, right? So we're standing on the shoulders of Harriet Tubman, right? So our history shows us that we always find a way. When there's a no way, we find a way. And that's our cultural form of healing also. And we think also in terms of, I want to go back really quickly in terms of the word slavery as opposed to enslavement, because when you talk about slavery, the focus is on the individual, like there's something wrong with you, you're deficit, you're a slave, right? Enslavement looks at the system. Yeah. The system was wrong, right? And we were a part of that system, and we're still a part of the system. And when we think about Georgia, it's so ironic because my background is of Spelman College, my beloved alma mater, right? And Stacey Abrams, Spelman's sister also, right? And so there I learned, what it's like to be a Black woman, what it means to be grounded in your greatness and your history. And I remember my graduation speaker was Oprah Winfrey. And she talked about the difference between being a slave girl and a queen girl, because society's going to try to make you think you're a slave girl, but you were always a queen girl. And so it's just so timely that we're talking about all of this right now, and that we're recognizing we're grounded in our greatness, and we know that we will persevere, but it's going to take a pivot, right? In terms of how we're pivoting and fighting for liberation, and we're doing so on all different fronts.
Yeah, absolutely. And that pivot can be very, very powerful, especially given, the time, that we are in. I've been watching very closely this whole, voter suppression piece. And of course, it's giving me flashbacks as one who was born and raised, in South Africa, where we had white minority rule, right? And I put out, the following, the big lie is birthing bad laws. With over 200 voter suppression laws pending and Republican-led state legislatures, like the ones that just passed, in Georgia, this, continue to usher in an apartheid minority rule style democracy, in the United States. And we all know that did not last, in South Africa. And it certainly won't last here, because you and I know, based on our history, that suppression might delay liberation, but it will never deny liberation. I think that's very, very important. And that's why we've got to stay, on the battlefield, and see what it is that we need to do around claiming who we are, in terms of, the men and women that God has created, ground ourselves, in, our greatness, our potential, our possibility, around that. As we, move towards conclusion, I want to get back to, what you said, Dr. Kimani, around sources, of cultural healing, so we can end up with at least providing a word up, for our folk, as we engage in the truth that needs to be said. Because in essence, we've just become a people of the big lie. the big lie that was there from the beginning. Thank God for the 1619 project. And then that big lie was, re-energized, reformed, by Trumpism. Now folk have again, grabbed onto that, a big lie to try and figure out, ways to advance it, to make it look good, around that and all of it. So clearly there has been a miseducation, of, our white brothers and sisters about who they are, what they about, what their history was all about, just as it was, in South Africa. So what are some of I'm going to ask all three of you, as you said what you, choose to challenge, what are some of the, sources for cultural healing and upliftment that you would like to share for us, as we, draw to a closure? I'm going to start with, Adjoa, and then get to Pastor Juju, and then I'm going to ask, Dr. Kimani to close us out. Adjoa, what are some of these, cultural, sources for healing and upliftment that you would like to share with us?
Stick with, our organizations that are doing the work, right? So we have many organizations that are in the fight for liberation, in the fight for action. So, I can start with like SCLC. They've been doing the work for liberation, especially around after the death and even prior to Breonna Taylor and George Floyd.
Absolutely.
Black Women for Wellness. Check out our work for the AIM CAPS, which are they're 4 community action teams now. South LA and South Bay was the start, but now there are 4 throughout LA County. And you can find us on Black Infants and Families. And there will be, there's a plethora of resources. Our community has expanded across the county. For me, I want to throw out all these books, but I just say go to SO1 and, really find, and I'll probably have to share this with you, Pastor Sauls, but there's one about Black rest, but I picked up something out of a poem recently of reclaiming our bodies. And it's, and I think that was really the big why for me. How are we going to reclaim our bodies, especially after seeing the tragic murders of our Asian American sisters? I think that is what is going to empower me. How do I reclaim my body?
Yeah, absolutely. And, some other organizations that we can also lift up is Black Women for Wellness, that's doing a great job. And I know that we'll pick up, the work around that Black Infant, Week, as well as, that April 16th
There's some
piece.
podcasts. Get ready.
So
Jan and I are 2 Black women with our 2 opinions. It's called I'm Just Saying.
All right now. So thanks for that. And of course, for you, I know it is, that spiritual, grounding, as a source around how do we connect ourselves with the divine, with God, and through that, then, be a light, and show light, to ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. I'll never forget. He is my source. He is my strength. I do nothing without God. And I thank you for that.
Great. Reverend Juju, your thoughts?
Repeat the question again. I was listening to Adjoa and forgot the question.
Yeah, I was just talking about just share some sources, for cultural healing and upliftment, for us, either, some that you've done, that you engage in. I mean, I love what you did last night around self-love. That's a source of cultural healing, in terms of.
So, so a source of cultural healing and uplift is I would encourage people to. There's some really great books that have come out recently that offer like a lot of soul healing. One of those being that I was able to get a hold of was Cicely Tyson's book. Yeah. And I'm lifting the book up to suggest to your listeners to start digging into Black literature. And that's one of the things that I've been doing this last year is really taking time to read in Black. There's so much healing in the words of Black folks. And how our stories are told through a healthy lens of Black culture with an emphasis on Black life. And so that's an easy way. And I say it's easy because you can download books to your phone, and you can listen to Audible while you're driving or sitting outside. You can carry them wherever. No one's going to ever stop you from having a book. And so that's one of the things that I have leaned into is reading, being very intentional about reading Black authors and Black literature. The second thing something that I make as a daily practice is meditation, prayer and meditation. So, and we have, a lot of Black folks who are now really getting into that space around meditation. At one time it was seen as something that, other people do. And, but we're reclaiming that space because it's something that we've always done. And so you have more and more groups showing up and apps showing up that have Black men and Black women leading meditation groups, leading meditation that has a Black culture lens on it. So the language, the focus, are as intentional for the healing of Black souls and Black bodies. So that's something that I engage and practice daily. And I would encourage, it has nothing to do with a person's, or it doesn't have to have anything to do with a person's faith tradition. You can be Christian or not. So I know we've been taught meditations for everything and everyone else, but it is for Black folks. It's something that Black folks have always done as part of our culture. We're just now getting to a place of reclaiming it as ours.
Right.
So
absolutely.
literature and meditation.
Great. All right. Dr. Kimani, your thoughts around, sources for cultural healing and upliftment?
Absolutely. So I would first always say spirituality, and, just thinking about, in terms of, for us as a people, how our spirituality has sustained us. And even when we were in the slave dungeons, when we were there in those horrible situations, that we were able to create symbols to remind us of our spirituality and the connection to the divine. And, even when we were enslaved, we were still able to carry on our practices in terms of connection to a higher power. So number one, spirituality. Next, the way of thinking and way of being that many of us were a part of, and that there's been a disconnect. And forgive me, Pastor Sauls, if I say this incorrectly. Ubuntu, is that correctly? Did I say correctly?
You said it right. Ubuntu.
Okay, I am, because we are, right? We are all interconnected, and we have to recognize that, and recognize that our destinies, our realities are all intertwined. The other is recognizing that family and friends is a form of healing and connection for us. So it could be people like we're blood related or maybe not blood related, right? So our play cousins and our play brothers and sisters, how do we also recognize that? And testimony, storytelling, being able to share our stories and how we've overcome is very powerful. And that can happen in the church, in terms of giving, testimony. It can happen in therapy. There's different ways that we can give testimony, but we need to be able to give our voice, because so many times we're silenced or we're not really seen, valued, or heard in terms of what we've experienced. And then the last is movement and music. So music, is our way to have that soul connection, but also movement. That has always been a way for us to connect to the divine also. And, there's something called Afro flow yoga. And it talks about, as Reverend Doc talked about, that many times we've been taught that meditation is not for our communities, yoga is not for our communities. That is absolutely not true. If you look at the sources of yoga and meditation, it started in Africa, and it was a way to connect to the divine. And so again, that's a way, in terms of that whitewashing of history. When we don't know our true history, then we'll take and say, oh, well, yoga, that's not, Christian, or meditating. That it absolutely is. It comes from Africa. So how do we tap into those cultural forms of healing that we've always had, and how do we reconnect?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned yoga, and Pastor Juju mentions meditation. I know that, for instance, at First AME Church, they've had yoga and meditation, a class weekly when it goes on. They've had that for many, many, many years. Us trying to deprive ourselves from that because of how it's been portrayed, and based on this framework that we're operating from, created through the ideology and the theology of white supremacy. It's just so much that we have to.
Sorry. I forgot to say one more thing. I'm so sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
So, okay, really quickly. So when we think about family and friends and why that's so important, is that we know that we have been the recipients of so much toxic stress. Yeah. And having, friends and family, it buffers that toxic stress. So it helps to mitigate it. So I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure I didn't forget to say that.
No, I think that's very, very important because, if you don't process that toxicity, you will project it. That's so important, and so creating space and place that is safe and whole to process that is very, very important. Otherwise, projection, takes place, and that is the case because we internalized, so much. It ain't going nowhere, it's just waiting to come out, intentionally or unintentionally, around that. So thanks so much. You also mentioned intersectionality, and so we want to lift that up, especially during this time as we, celebrate Women's History Month, as we look at Georgia and just, pledge solidarity with, our Asian, and our AAPI community, around what's happening, around, hashtag stop, Asian hate, because, white supremacy has, its eye on all of us, and the sooner we get to know and understand that, the better it is. There is no room for us in assimilation. The only, way forward is, liberation, so that can actually contribute, to the liberation, of those, who think they are superior, or who created schemes and systems to justify the lie of their superiority, around that. Dr. Kimani, Norington-Sands, thank you so much for your time, with us. Reverend Dr. Najuma Smith-Pollard, thank you for making yourself available. And then, Adjoa Jones, thanks so much for bringing your perspective. Once again, you have proven the assets and the resources we have in our community around how it is that we continue to fight the good fight. And while we're doing that, remember to enjoy some radical rest. After all, caring for ourselves is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Thank you so much for making this series such, a powerful experience, as we've reflected on, what do we choose, to challenge in celebration of International Women's Day as well as Women's Herstory Month. We close out Faith Without Borders today and this series, once again with that video, of this spoken word, this powerful spoken word, of that we had at the beginning. We're going to try and see if we can pull it up again, for you. If not, go and check out, this video at www.internationalwomensday.org, as we share together. Let's keep on fighting a good fight, and as we do so, engage in self-preservation. Take care, beloved. Be well. Peace.